All right, colleagues, we'll go ahead and get started with our webinar. My name is Alina Hicks, and I work in admission at Southern Methodist University in Dallas. And the reason that I'm with you today is that I am a part of the AI and College Admissions Board. And we love to bring you content about what's going on in this landscape to empower you in your offices and to share what we are doing as well. We will have an hour today to talk about AI through the ages, the history of AI. And I'd also like to ask that you use the question and answer, the Q&A feature throughout for your questions. And after our speaker's presentation, I will take some of those questions and we'll get answers for you. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Elizabeth Kirby, who is with Enroll, who is our speaker today with wonderful insight. Elizabeth, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm super excited to talk today about artificial intelligence through the ages. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here real quick. But like you said, my name's Elizabeth Kirby. I currently live in Missouri, and after spending about 12 years in enrollment management, I made the switch to the vendor side. I am also working on my doctorate in educational leadership, which acted as really a springboard for a lot of the information that I'm going to be sharing today. So if you're really super extra curious about any of the things I talk about, I have probably 500 articles that you're welcome to read through as well. But I recently received a promotion as recent as of last week and now serve as the Director of Enrollment Success at Enroll, which means I have the pleasure of leading partner success and strategy with all of our amazing institutions that we work with. And if you haven't heard of Enroll yet, that is not what this presentation is about, but feel free to check us out. We are a machine learning data science company that helps you see data insights to inform institutional prioritization and strategy. But enough about me. I am here today to talk about AI through the ages, and I want to start off by giving you a little bit of a pop quiz, which I know is everybody's favorite, academic experience. But I'm going to go ahead and launch a poll real quick for you guys to just test a little bit of your knowledge on the history of artificial intelligence and some of our historical figures. It looks like most of you guys are finishing up. Give you about 5 more seconds to get your answers locked in. All right, so now we are going to go through these couple of questions here. And starting off with, which historical figure proposed the concept of machines convincing a human judge that it was human through conversation? And if you answered Tony Stark, you're my favorite person in the world, but the answer is actually Alan Turing. And we're going to talk a lot about him through this presentation. The next question, all of you guys got right. Amazing. What year was the term artificial intelligence first introduced at an academic workshop? And this was in 1956 at Dartmouth. And then the last question is, what is the name of the early AI program developed by Newell and Simon in 1955 that could prove mathematical theorems and is often considered the first demonstration of human problem solving? And the answer to this one is the logic theorist. About, looks like 3 of you got that one right. So moving on from that stressful quiz section, we're going to start this conversation by going pretty far back in time to the history and the story of Talos. Talos is a myth in Greek mythology that was first mentioned around 700 BC. Talos is a bronze automaton who was constructed by the god Hephaestus to protect the island of Crete. And in this myth, it explains that he was programmed in mythic terms to circle the island 3 times daily and hurl rocks at intruders. So he was there to protect the island. He is one of the earliest fictional examples of an intelligent man-made entity, and his behavior was very mechanical and rule-bound, much like the AI operating systems we use today based on codes and inputs. So the myth explains, spoiler alert if you haven't looked at it yet, that his demise came not from his strength or lack of strength, but from trickery. Medea fooled him to removing the nail that kept him alive or kept his life force inside. It's a super interesting myth. I really encourage you, if you're curious about it or intrigued, to take a look at it. But the reason that I bring this up is because I want to show that we've been talking about advanced technology for ages. It's kind of an interesting starting point. Moving forward in time a bit, we come across another foundational figure, George Boole. Born in 1815, he really revolutionized the world by creating a mathematical system using binary logic. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the ones and zeros of computer coding. I can't do computer coding, but I know that there's ones and zeros involved. And he also created a system that, if you're involved in academics, likely is the same system your library uses to do searches online, using operators such as and, or, and not. And this system became the foundation for modern computing and really resonates in a lot of different ways in our modern lives. So with those two foundational pieces, I want to dive into the early foundations of AI. So this is going to be in the 1940s and 50s. Hold up. Wait a minute. We're going to, before we dive in, I want to take a moment really quickly to explore why I think the history of AI is relevant, why it's important, and why it matters. So first, understanding AI's origin helps us demystify the technology and really separate the hype and buzzwords of what we're seeing in the media and all around us today from the realities of what the tools we're using are providing. It gives us a clearer and more grounded perspective, and the context opens the door to helping us make some more informed decisions. So AI is evolving at such a rapid pace. I often feel like my head is spinning just trying to keep up. But I found that understanding some of these past, foundational elements really provided a strong foundation for me to make sense of the future. So also don't feel like you have to be kind of a guru of everything. We were talking about that before the webinar even started, that it's okay to not know everything, and learning, what you can is good. But the other thing I want to mention as well is that knowing how AI has evolved really gives us the ability to engage with it critically and creatively. And I think both of these pieces are really important because understanding how it was built and the foundation of it helps us see both the challenges that we need to maybe overcome and the opportunities that we have in front of us a little bit better. And this really matters particularly for our industry because the way that we choose to engage with artificial intelligence ultimately shapes the experiences and outcomes for our students. So with that background, I think we are ready to dive in. So like I mentioned earlier, we're going to talk about Alan Turing a little bit here as well. And Alan Turing was a pioneering mathematician, and he posed a fundamental question that really shaped the future in relation to artificial intelligence. And that question was, can a machine think? He proposed this now famous Turing test as a way to evaluate whether a machine could imitate a human conversation convincingly enough to fool a human judge. And around the same time, another leader in the industry, John von Neumann, was revolutionizing another critical piece, general computing. And so these foundational pieces are really often taken for granted when we talk about technology and just how we got to, have the ability to have a cell phone in our pocket that does everything. But his work particularly was on stored program architecture and created the basis for modern computers. This architecture made it possible for machines to process both data and instructions at the same time. And the capability was really essential for developing or starting to develop the intelligence systems that we're going to talk about and the ones we use today. So diving in a little bit deeper, I want to focus on the Turing test itself. So here's how it works if you're not familiar with it. A human judge interacts in a text-only conversation with both a human and a computer. And if the judge cannot reliably distinguish which participant is the computer, the machine is said to have passed the test, because they say it demonstrates, at least on the surface, human-like intelligence. So the brilliance of the Turing test is that it doesn't rely on how the machine is working internally, but it focuses entirely on its outward behavior. And so this is a concept that still resonates today in how we evaluate AI performance. We look at what's the result, not necessarily how did it get there. And in fact, we still see echoes of a Turing test in our everyday lives. I would venture a guess that almost all of us completed one of these CAPTCHAs either today or in the past couple of days as we've logged into the hundreds of systems that we log into every day. But CAPTCHA actually stands for a completely automated public Turing test to tell computers and humans apart. So this is a modern twist on the original Turing test idea. So instead of humans trying to tell if they're talking to a computer, now computers are challenging us to prove that we're human. And so every time you squint at these silly little distorted numbers and letters on your screen and click that "I'm not a robot" button, you're participating in a mini reverse Turing test. So this important connection reminds us that AI's challenges and its possibilities are not really theoretical. They're really part of our everyday experience, and they're part of our experience in ways we aren't fully aware of all the time. So returning back to the Turing test, it set a lasting standard for evaluating machine behavior and one that informs how we assess and trust intelligent systems today. So in enrollment management, when we talk about using AI to predict student behavior or optimize communication or improve mid-funnel engagement, the underlying question is very similar. Can AI solutions and the tools and vendors that we are proposing or using understand human behavior authentically and effectively enough to make a meaningful impact? And so while we've advanced far beyond the early text-only conversations, the fundamental challenge Turing proposed still shapes how we approach these conversations and strategies today. All right, jumping forward a little bit to the birth of the official artificial intelligence field. So the term artificial intelligence was coined at a 1956 Dartmouth Summer Research Project Conference, which was organized by John McCarthy, the computer scientist, not the senator, they're not related, and a few others, which marks the official start of AI as a formal academic field. And so from there, early pioneers, names like Herbert Simon, Alan Newell, Marvin McKinsey, John McCarthy, and many, many others developed foundational programs such as Logic Theorist and General Problem Solver. And these programs aim to replicate human problem solving. And so during this time, researchers used a really interesting protocol called the Think Aloud protocol. And this was used to study how humans solve problems and helped shape how early AI models were created to mimic human reasoning and their learning process. So the Think Aloud protocol involved asking experts, like imagine a mathematician, to verbalize or talk through their thoughts in a step-by-step process as they work through a problem, giving researchers insights into how human thinking could be modeled by machines. So it's the way advanced version of showing your work on your homework assignment, but literally talking through every step that's going through your brain as you are solving a problem. And so we're flying through time, but we're going to keep moving forward. During the 1970s to about 1990s, the field of AI hit what is now known as the AI winters. And this was a time when enthusiasm around artificial intelligence started to cool down, partially because of funding declines. So funding went down sharply because progress wasn't keeping up with the public expectations, and many institutions who had previously supported this research felt like their resources could be better spent elsewhere. But even in this slow period, we saw the rise of something called expert systems. So these are early AI tools like MySyn that could offer advice in areas like medicine and law. So MyCin, MyCin, was an early expert system that helped diagnose bacterial infections and recommended treatments by asking doctors a series of questions and using rule-based systems to match the symptoms with likely infections and then suggest appropriate antibiotics. These systems were really, really impressive for their time, but they had a major drawback. They relied heavily on human experts to manually program all of the rules. So this made them really hard to scale and limited their long-term impact. So while the innovation in general slowed down, there was still groundwork being laid for the next big leap in AI. So we're going to leap forward again to the rise of machine learning. So as we moved into the 1990s and the early 2000s, artificial intelligence really saw this major comeback. And this time the focus shifted quite a bit to learning from data inputs. Instead of relying on hard-coded rules like the expert systems did, things like machine learning started to pop up, allowing computers to analyze large data sets, identify patterns, and then improve their performance over time. So this particular shift helped overcome the scalability issues that held AI back during the winters of decades past. But the real magic in this time period happened with the growth of something called neural networks, especially these artificial neural networks, which were inspired by the human brain. So these networks allowed machines to do things like begin to recognize images, understand speech, and even make basic decisions. And it was a huge leap forward. So computers weren't just following, step-by-step instructions anymore. They were figuring out things on their own based on the information provided to them, based on what they had learned. And then came kind of a tipping point. So AI started to move out of the lab and into everyday life. And so one standout moment was in 1997 when IBM's Deep Blue beat world chess champion Garry Kasparov. And I know we all follow world chess very, very closely. I know it's like a holiday in my family. I'm kidding. I've never watched a professional chess game, but we watch it all so closely, and we know that this was a big deal. It showed that machine learning could not only keep up with the way that humans were thinking, but in some cases even outperform it. And around the same time, early voice assistants like personalized recommendation systems, similar to how Netflix functions today, to recommend your next show, started popping up. And so AI was no longer this kind of, mystified future dream, but it was really becoming a part of our daily routines. All right, moving on to a little bit of more modern times. So this is the period of time that really marked the arrival of artificial intelligence into what we would consider kind of mainstream life. And this era was fueled by what we call the big data boom. So the explosion of the internet, social media, connected tech things started generating massive, massive amounts of data. And that data became really the fuel for training these much smarter AI models, and models that could finally learn from far more complex and nuanced patterns than ever before. So at the same time, deep learning advanced AI's capabilities dramatically. So instead of simply recognizing basic patterns, systems began using these increasingly complex tasks, doing deep learning, which was a method based on the neural networks we talked about in the last section. And these neural networks have so many layers, and so it's kind of like stacking algorithms. So these networks mimic, in a really abstract way, kind of how the human brain processes information, which allowed AI to recognize speech, images, and even natural language with really high level of clarity and skill. And as we began to see some of these real world wins that made headlines. So for example, another sport I know we all follow very closely, the strategic game of Go. Google's AlphaGo defeated a world champion in the strategy game. This was something previously thought to be years away. And also in this time period, we saw the rise of virtual assistants like Siri and Alexa, and we welcomed these things into our home and fundamentally changed how we interacted with technology. So beyond personal use, AI expanded into industries like healthcare, education, and specifically in enrollment management, where AI now supports everything from student outreach to predictive modeling, and is used probably at most institutions across the country at this point in some way or another. All right. What is next? That's the big question on everybody's mind. So I'm going to give you a little bit of information on that as well. So as we look ahead, the future of artificial intelligence is both exciting and complex. There's a ton of ways that AI will change the work that we do. Some things we know are coming and can be prepared for. Some we're not ready to talk about yet, and some we just don't know until they get here. But the advancements, particularly in enrollment intelligence, are available now and is something that is growing rapidly. So, for example, rather than relying solely on traditional indicators to predict enrollment, like demographic information, GPA, whether a student visited campus or not, AI has the ability to find complex patterns within the historical and real-time behavioral data to improve resource allocation and potentially yield modeling. So, for example, machine learning can predict which admitted students are most likely to enroll, which allows institutions to more precisely distribute their aid or their counselor's time or communication strategies. So there's a lot of ways that it can be applied. So another part of the future, particularly related to AI, is about collaboration. AI tools are designed in most cases to augment human work, not fully replace it in some cases. And in higher education, this could mean that AI-powered systems are designed to help admissions and advising teams. For example, like flag students who are at risk of melting or dropping out before these things happen. So you're able to identify them using AI, but still relying on the human power to come in and interact with that student in a meaningful way. We're also seeing the rise of hyper-personalization. AI is enabling these more adaptive systems that respond in real time to individual needs and behaviors of our students. And so the opportunity here is massive. The ability to make our services smarter, faster, and more dynamic can be better suited to serve our students. So, for example, dynamic content generation, like email, text message, and even chatbot interactions at this point can be auto-personalized for tone or timing or content relevance, which really improves the connection between the students using those resources. But with great power comes great responsibility. And as AI becomes more capable, we also would be remiss if we didn't talk about the ethics. So there's questions around bias and algorithms, data privacy, and transparency. And AI offers us tools both to detect and mitigate unconscious biases in admissions and our communication strategies. So AI can both be the problem and also help us solve the problem in some ways. There's a couple different things that AI can do to help in this space. One in particular is equity auditing. So you can use algorithms to analyze outcomes across demographics to ensure fairness in the ways that applications are being processed, decisions are being made, the way communications are being sent out, and financial aid strategy. Additionally, looking at AI from a version or lens of explainable AI. So modern AI can now provide human understandable reasons for its predictions. So this looks at more of like cracking the machine open and looking at the decisions that are being made. This helps teams kind of trust and defend the decisions because we're able to utilize this to mitigate the high levels of subjectivity from some parts of the admissions process. And also the really great one for all of our schedules and calendars is kind of the automation of routine tasks. There are tools coming on the market for transcript evaluation, credit evaluation for transfer students, and being able to identify ways that AI can help us reduce time spent on these administrative tasks, which really allows our staff to focus on relationship building. So I do want to dive into ethics a little bit more. I know that's not the whole point of this presentation, but I think it's important. So before we go too much deeper into kind of the potential, I want to take a look at the challenges of AI, because as we adopt these tools, we're also inheriting kind of the potential bias, blind spots, and all the ethical dilemmas that come along with it. So one of the most pressing issues that we hear about all the time is bias. So in general, AI systems learn from historical data, and if that data reflects social inequalities, those inequalities can be baked into the systems that we then use from that point on. So for example, if an admissions algorithm is trained on years of biased admissions trends, it may unknowingly favor certain racial or socioeconomic groups. So I want to do a little bit of an exercise and have you guys all close your eyes. I know I can't see any of you, so the trust exercise. Close your eyes, and as your eyes are closed, imagine an AI robot. Get that image in your head. All right. Now, how many of you guys imagined a robot that is mostly or completely white in color? So research reminds us that these tools, including how they are reflected in society, often reflect the worldview of their creators, who are overwhelmingly white and male. And even in the way that we visualize AI, often as white or Western influence, reinforces certain racialized ideas of intelligence and power. So, oh, you can open your eyes if they're still closed. So moving on from kind of the bias pieces, we also have to think about privacy. So the data sources that we have collect and process a ton of information. And if you're using AI to process or analyze this information, it is going through lots of personal data from your admissions criteria and all the things a student submits in the admissions process to potentially housing and health information. So as we expand the use cases in higher education, we need to be responsible for the legalities of that. We are all familiar with policies like FERPA, but we need to be aware of how how AI interacts compliance-wise and also trust-wise with our students' digital lives. And also there are other concerns like job displacement, lack of transparency, and cybersecurity risks. And these are already affecting how campuses operate. So while the promise of AI is really exciting, and we're excited to see kind of all the ways that it can help our students and help our jobs, we can't separate that from the very, very real need for accountability, equity, and then thoughtful implementation. So I do want to look at AI from a bit more of a kind of a tactical frame. So going in and jumping and saying, are you ready to use AI in your work? I'm sure most, if not all of you, if you're here, are already using it in some way. But before implementing a new AI tool, I think institutions should ask questions in these 4 major areas. The first being, what problem are you trying to solve? Right now, the way that AI exists, AI is designed to solve a particular problem in your institution or in your workflow. And one of the ways that we can visualize this is through something called the OSO framework. So OSO framework is a very major oversimplification of consumer decision theory. But we know that students don't make college decisions kind of in a straight line. They move through this arc and this process that is the same process we go through every time we buy anything. So for example, if we were going to go buy or purchase a house, that's a major, financial decision. And we're going to start with that house search by probably opening up Zillow and using some filters to look for houses that have the right number of bedrooms or bathrooms or are in the right school district or neighborhood. And that's the first kind of objective or box checking phase, as we call it. Same thing goes for our college students. That first objective phase is when they're looking at colleges and thinking, do you have my major? Is it rural or urban? Is it close enough or far enough away from home? And then we all move into the subjective phase. So in our house buying experience, this is when we're walking through the open house or kind of the visit to that home and thinking, oh, I could put my Christmas tree over here, or I could imagine raising kids here and then playing in the backyard. The same thing happens for our college students. They are walking around campus imagining, can I be successful here? Do I think I'll fit in? Do I think I'll succeed? And then we all move to the objective phase, which is really similar in both examples, is can I afford this? That's the commitment and kind of that outcome phase of we've been convinced, we know they have what I need. I feel like I could be safe and welcome in this environment. But now we're back to the tactical objective phase of, can I afford it? How do I submit my housing form? Where do I submit my deposit? How do I find a roommate? Kind of going through those tactical pieces. I share this with you to help give kind of underscore that each part of this process that the students are going through requires a different type of tool. So for example, an AI chatbot may be the best tool for that first objective phase of helping students ask those simple questions. Do you have a nursing program? Where are you located? What is your admissions criteria? But it's going to be significantly less effective sharing the subjective culture of your campus with a prospective student. And so looking at the problem that you're trying to solve and identifying it specifically can help you identify what types of AI are best suited to assist in those spaces. So the next question I would encourage you guys to look at is, do we have the infrastructure to support AI? So AI on a college campus requires technical expertise and maintenance. Do you have the internal capacity to do some of those things? Do you need vendor support? Where are you as an institution in being able to align with the work that it takes to bring AI effectively to your campus? One thing I will say in this section is don't disqualify yourself from being able to use AI because your data is a mess. Everyone's data is a mess. I hear that from institutions on a daily basis. And then also that you're a unicorn or you're different from the other institutions around you. And that is something that AI can help with is, we don't compare institutions to institutions in the same way when we have the computing power of AI. So don't disqualify yourself before you even get started if those are your concerns. The next one to consider, and we've talked a lot about this, so I'm not going to dive too heavily into it, is are we considering the ethical and compliance risks? Institutions really must prioritize this in their process. So if you're looking at a new vendor or looking to work with somebody in AI, don't overlook or rush the IT review of those vendor products that you want to bring on. Really, dive in deep and try to help and understand the things that they're looking at and why they're important, because that'll help your process moving forward and identifying vendors and tools that can best help you and your students. And then fourth and final, does the benefit outweigh the cost? So a lot of times AI is that hype. Some of our campuses have even been encouraged to find AI to use, so you can say that you're using AI. But do that carefully and cautiously. If the AI that you're using doesn't save you time or money or improve your student outcomes, it's not worth the investment. So be critical about how you're looking at that and not diving in headfirst because it's the new exciting kind of buzzword thing to do. One other thing I will add in this section is that AI is not a magic wand. It's not something that you can plug in and play all the time and it just works perfectly and it's great. AI is really, really powerful and it can do a lot of really, really cool things. But using it strategically and being ready to invest the time that it takes is going to help you have really, really strong outcomes from what you're working with. So as we wrap up and we'll open the floor for questions here in just a couple of minutes, I want to kind of go back to where Alan Turing started of can machines think? Now, we're not just watching AI think, but we're actually working with it in our lives today. And particularly in college admissions, this is becoming more and more real every single day. But when we take a step back and see how we got here, how AI evolved from these rule-based systems that were trained by experts to tools that actually help us learn and collaborate with each other, we're able to use it more intentionally and not just go along for the ride anymore, but kind of have a say in where it goes or how we're using it. So as we walk away from the webinar here today and go back to work, don't think of this as the end of a timeline that kind of stops here, but just as a foundation to help you think about AI as you're bringing it to your campus or even using it in your personal life. And I really appreciate you guys joining me on this journey and happy to open the floor to some questions.
Great presentation, Elizabeth. Very much
Thank you.
enjoyed that. Let me see if we have any questions that have started. They haven't started just yet, but I have a couple for you. Um, and everyone, you can use the Q&A for your questions, so feel free to do that. So there's been a lot of talk, Elizabeth. I think it was the founder of Microsoft was saying, AI is going to take over and we will not have jobs. And I think you made such a great point about that isn't the case, that we run parallel, or it's there to enhance what we do. Can you talk just a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So to be fair, I do think that there are some jobs and some pieces of our jobs that will be replaced with AI, but it's going to allow us to get back to our kind of original purpose, particularly if we look at admissions counselors themselves. My company did a time study and looked at, I think it was 22 institutions, over 200 counselors, where they were spending their time. And on average, they were spending counselors, the folks that we pay to connect with students and build relationships and help students find their pathway. We're spending 30 to 50% of their time in the data, not talking to students. And so there's some of those things that can be replaced with AI so that those staff members have a better opportunity to really connect with the students that they're working with. In addition to that, there's some interesting articles out there about what happens when we do take away some of those, more what we would consider mundane tasks from employees. And one of the things, if you are leading a team, to be aware of is that like creativity fatigue. And so if you take away all of these like mundane kind of mindless things that your staff are doing, you're asking them to be on creatively 100% of the time, and that's just not possible either. So there is a fair balance between some of the things that we can replace with AI, but also not asking the world of our staff just to be on and smiley and ready 100% of the time. Some of those things do help us reset as we're moving through the day.
Yeah, Elizabeth, I totally agree, because you're right. There are some tasks that we have the capability now, rudimentary but important tasks that can be done through AI, and you can free people up to do other more pertinent work. So here are some questions for you. This is from Trevor. How do you see AI energy consumption fitting into the future, especially as that might not be a direct cost for institutions implementing a vendor's tool?
Yeah, I think it is a very interesting thing to talk about, especially in the recent articles coming out about if you should say please and thank you to your chat GPT and Claude. But I think this is an interesting concept. Being on the vendor side, this is something we think about because we do have to pay for the amount of AI computing that's happening. And I think that will end up being reflected in your vendor's costs. I would anticipate at some point that these things will kind of pan out and come to some sort of a plateau. But I'm not an economist or an expert in how that's going to or when that's going to work. But yeah, I think it's going to come through in how your vendor's tools are priced and at what point we're able to provide services to institutions, especially larger institutions, and how much data processing actually needs to happen in those cases versus a smaller institution with much less data.
Makes sense. Here's another question for you. What do you recommend educators do to help prepare themselves for this technology? And then there's a second question. Many of us lack opportunities for formal training and feel really unprepared. Is there a tool or course you recommend?
That's a really great question. I think being here today is a great first step in that pathway, is finding resources that are free and accessible to you, to just start to learn. And taking that with, a little bit of a grain of salt. Don't try to dive in and learn everything because you can't. Even the fact that this is my research topic, I work with an AI company. I'm writing a dissertation on this topic. I have purposefully narrowed myself into a very small but still vast corner of the AI world. And I am looking particularly at one part of it. So trying to narrow down exactly where I'm going to fit in this. And that's looking at the ethics of using it in the college admissions process and how it affects the administrative side of a campus. I don't expend any of my time looking necessarily in a professional aspect at how it affects the academic side of campuses or how it's affecting faculty in the classroom, mostly because I don't have the brain capacity to do all of those things. So pick the topics that are most pertinent to you, and look at those things. Find your articles, webinars like this, and other great resources to help you start to feel prepared. But also, it's okay to feel unprepared. We all feel, even those of us that are studying this, also feel very unprepared because it is just moving so quickly. So don't feel like you're on an island there.
I'll add this, Elizabeth. As I was beginning to do research in AI for school, many of the things that I want to do in my office have come from Google Scholar. I just started reading papers. And because we're in the business, I mean, they made a lot of sense. And then I also realized that some of the people doing the research on AI and enrollment and things like that, they may not necessarily be working with the enrollment or admission office at their university or college. They are writing and researching. So that's a great opportunity too, to kind of step in that way. I want to talk to you a little bit about your OSO framework. That was
Yes.
an intriguing slide. Any additional practical, like you talked about the practicality of it, but any other examples of ways to use that in the work that we're doing?
Yeah, it is one of my favorite things, and I don't claim ownership to it whatsoever. It is a tried and true theory, consumer decision theory that is much more vast. There's versions of it with 5 different segments and 12 different segments. So there's far more versions of it if you're super interested. But the OSO part of it, the objective, subjective, objective, was a way for me to visualize how a student is moving through a path that's not necessarily tied to the things we normally think about, like this student applied, this student is accepted, this student deposited. But all of our applied students or all of our accepted students are not behaviorally acting in the same way. And so when we look at students based on where they are behaviorally on this journey to enrollment, some of those kind of categorizations tend to fall to the wayside a little bit. I've also used this with enrollment teams to kind of talk about how they're approaching students. So I'm a little bit biased because Enroll is built on something similar to the OSO framework. So utilizing the tool that the institutions we work with can see where their students are in those parts of the journey. But we talked to them about when a student who's in their first objective phase reaches out to you, what kind of conversation is the best use of your time. Leaning into a professor on our campus is studying how, jellyfish migrate. They're not ready for that conversation yet. They're ready for, do you even have marine biology? And so adapting to where the student is going to help you provide information in a way that's more digestible to the students and kind of a better way to meet them where they are. And that can be done in one-on-one personal conversations and, mass communications as well. Reaching out to a student who may be admitted, but behaviorally is still in that first objective phase, reaching out to them and saying, hey, here's where you submit your deposit. They're not ready for that conversation. So knowing that when you go into those conversations can help how you address and kind of talk to your students. It's also super interesting to ask admissions counselors, students in these phases, what kind of questions do you think they're asking? And what questions aren't they asking, but are they probably curious about? So it's an interesting way to look at your enrollment funnel, not based on stages.
Love it. Okay, here's something else for you. And I want you all to know, as Elizabeth and I met, I was telling her, I was like, I do a lot with AI and I'm on this board and I love it. And it's a big part of my life. But it's like people think that I must be at work with every AI application and innovation ever. And that's not the case. We're going slow. We need to put some people in place. We need to think things through. So, Elizabeth, that great question about how do you start? Let's talk about, you talked about infrastructure. Let's talk a little bit more about that and what things that we can start thinking about and not be in a rush, but kind of thoughtful process of infrastructure.
Yeah, I know from my time in enrollment management, we worked, connected to our IT and our tech folks, but it was a different department, and we just sent in tickets when we needed them and asked questions when we had them. But I'd really encourage you on your campus to find a way or find some time to talk to your IT staff and the folks that are, one, running your CRM, but also just at an institutional level. Where are you with data security, and what requirements do you have of vendors that you work with? And looking at kind of the infrastructure from the actual like technology standpoint is one thing I would encourage you to do. And then the other thing is to talk to your staff. If you are at the leadership level and you are looking at all these new tools that are out on the market, and there are a ton of them, and a lot of them are really, really great, but talk to your staff and figure out what they feel would be best and most helpful for them. Because you may think, a full AI recruiter or this new analytics tool or this other thing that we're doing on our website would be really cool and helpful for all these reasons. But don't forget to involve the staff that are routinely on the ground talking to students and going to the high school fairs and talking to the guidance counselors and driving the innovation from that direction as well.
This is a little bit of a loaded question, so I'll be very thoughtful with it. In enrollment, let's talk about like scholarships and financial aid. And we always tell our students, if someone is, saying, pay us $1,000 and we'll help you with financial aid and scholarships, that probably isn't the right route to go, that it isn't the right, we do this for a living, and there's tons of free things out there to help educate. When you think about AI, machine learning, and whether one is a novice or, you've got things in place and you're growing those types of technology in your office, how do you vet who you partner with? What are some of the things that you might want to think about as you're beginning to partner with people outside of your institution?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I think there's a lot of things to ask vendors and people that you're working with. First, I would encourage you to talk to the vendors. I know, like, taking a vendor call and doing a demo, we all get a million emails a day. I've sent them, I've received them, I get it. But talk to them and ask questions. Don't, just get totally sucked into, the cool new trick and hype and buzzword. But ask them a lot of questions about how their process is built. There's some things they can't necessarily explain fully, but ask a lot of questions. And one of the things that I'm seeing a lot being on the vendor side is ask how the product that they might be selling you is different from the product that they're selling your competitor down the road. Because technology has advanced to a point today where we are fully capable of customizing product and resources and insights for individual institutions. And we should, based on the research that my company has done, we've found that even institutions that would consider themselves peer institutions, your students are behaving differently, and we can show you how. And so we don't build the same product for two institutions. We start with a completely blank slate, and we build a custom product for that institution. So finding vendors that are willing to lean into the process and the culture that you have already built, the tools that you've already constructed, versus a vendor that's coming in and saying, just slap this new tool on top and it'll be great, which sounds wonderful because it sounds like a lot less work and things you don't maybe have to dive too deep into, but a tool that's really built to leverage the things you've already done is going to be far more successful for your institution, and help with kind of the change management that I think a lot of enrollment leaders and counselors are really fatigued with, the amount of change in our industry just from all of the things external, COVID, the FAFSA fiasco, to just generally working in the world today.
Elizabeth, one more question, and you have been incredible. So we have people in the group that are new to this or just entering into it. And then it looks like from the chat and from seeing comments, there are some people that are far along into this journey with this technology. I always love a webinar that challenges me, gives me a question to think about or to take along with me. So thinking about the diversity of our audience, what's a challenge for someone who is just entering into this that you want them to think about or talk through or take an action? And then for those that are really into AI, machine learning, what is something that you would say to them as well?
That is a really good question. I would say for people who are new to this field or new to utilizing AI, is to spend some time and pick a tool or any part of a tool, and look at how it is built. Actually look and try to research, some of how it's created, what the history of it is, what are some of the things that you should be aware of, looking at like bias and ethics and things along those lines. From somebody who's been around this world for a long time, I would encourage you to continue to be open to new ideas and new challenges. We have constructed, and myself personally constructed, this playbook of things that I use, and I'm familiar with and comfortable with. But continue to challenge yourself out of the box. If you're a ChatGPT user, try out Claude for a day or two and see if you really can get to the differences, and continue to challenge and open yourself up, and don't fall into ruts of well, I've done this one for long enough and it knows my voice and my tone, so I'm just going to stick with it. But continue to put the work in to challenge yourself.
Incredible recommendations, Elizabeth. This has been an incredible talk. I have learned so much. I have tons of other notes, but I'm not gonna pelt you with any more questions. For those of us that are still with us, if you could fill out the survey, we would greatly appreciate it. On behalf of the AI in College Admissions Board and interest group, thank you for your time today, and we've truly enjoyed it, Elizabeth.
Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure getting to share this topic with everybody, and just talk about something that I've been writing, in my house in my dissertation for months and months. Be able to kind of, crack that open and share that with the industry has been really a real pleasure.
We've loved it. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.